Alright, we've got 3 packages. Another one that arrived earlier, but that one is non-anime, so I've already opened it. But let's get these open. I'm trying to think what I'm looking at the back of that anime, because it almost rings bell of something else. I actually can't think what. Alright, but before we cover those, let's go over quickly the Steven Universe Complete DVD box set, which contains Steven Universe, Steven Universe Future, and Steven Universe the movie. Not the order you'd watch. You'd watch Steven Universe the movie, then Steven Universe Future. But as you can see, it's a nice shiny box. On the inside, it's kind of strange because it's a book that hangs upside down, but it's got some very Steven Universe drawings. A lot of these should be reminiscent of what's on the discs, which are up there. This is a less than ideal thing. But basically, as far as I can tell, it looks like it's got the same DVDs from Steven Universe Seasons 1 and 2 in the movie. And then 3, 4, 5, and Future are, added on. Interesting. It's been good to reminisce about some of the moments of that series. So, Bleach Blu-ray set 9. We're gonna just get in there. The backs are different. Well, you can see it's region A. What other information would Viz have on here? Because I think they tend to put the audio information somewhere else. Well, you know the dub's on there anyways, so it pretty much doesn't matter. Some loose discs here. Or at least one. Okay. It's almost like every single disc is loose in here. It was just so tight that, yeah, every single disc was loose. Huh. And the owner... Okay, this is, talking about him being the owner of that one shop. So we got, handful of discs. It's Bleach. Next up, we've got Violet Evergarden, the complete series. So last week was the movie, and this week is the series. Now, technically, when I say last week, this means this is what I showed, but since Amazon is shipping most stuff such that it arrives the day after it would come out, it basically means that technically the series came out last week. And there was a limited edition version, and I did order a copy of it, but I ordered it kind of late, so it didn't ship from Amazon, so it didn't have Prime shipping. So instead of denying myself and y'all the chance to see this, Region A, English dub, specials, opening, ending, songs, Japanese trailer, English trailer. Basically, I guess I'm treating Violet Evergarden a little more carefully, especially since my lack of a limited edition is only because I pre-ordered everything. Actually, I didn't even pre-order this. I ordered it like day of last week. Man, I am not on top of my pre-ordering of stuff. So, anyways, whoa, we've got 2 discs. It's some interesting sketch art. I'm trying to remember if that was what the movie was like in its packaging, but I don't remember. Especially since I didn't really open the movie. I took a quick look online and determined that the movie is a sequel to this, and it was also produced like a year and a half after the series, so it makes the most sense to watch the series here first before the movie, and that, affects things. So this is Ahiru no Sora. Collection 1. Basketball or something. Interesting. There we go. It's just, I thought this was being tenacious, but actually I'm suffering from the opposite problem. The plastic's falling apart so easily that I'm losing the ability to feel it beneath my fingertips. Interesting. But still opened. Let's see. Looking on the back, I see Region A. I see an English dub, which is interesting because I kind of expected this to maybe be sub-only. Normally they'd shake him down for lunch money. Now they're his teammates. So this is about people who are bullies, maybe, but bring episodes 1 through 24 on 3 discs. So it's called Collection 1, but it's but the case is a little falling apart right there. They say it like there is a main character. I don't know what to make of this. And this was the face that I saw from a distance. I'm like, why does that look familiar? And looking at it closely now, I still can't tell. It maybe looks like a mix of Hetalia? I don't know. And then we got a re-release of Paranoia Agent, this time on Blu-ray. So, you know, of course I picked up my Blu-ray copy and I went for the steelbook version. Truth is stranger than fiction. And if you've never seen it, this is a series directed by Satoshi Kon or something like that. I'm wondering if it says that somewhere around here. And if you're not familiar, it says from Satoshi Kon. So if you've ever seen Paprika, Millennium Actress, Perfect Blue, or Tokyo Godfathers, which is not mentioned on here, you know, this is a series made by him, and it was actually pretty good. You know, I'm not sure if episode by episode you would look at it and say, oh yeah, this is definitely the most exciting thing ever, but it's definitely the case that you would you know, just watch the series and then get your mind kind of fucked, because Satoshi Kon plays with the perception that the audience has when watching it, and they definitely, he had a chance to explore a couple of his different styles of doing that stuff in this. Like, he had one episode that was way more like Millennium Actress than I guess everything else that was going on in there. But then, I don't know. This is one of those series where my description of it is, it felt like I, the person watching the series, not like me, but the person watching the series, kind of felt like we, the viewers, were the ones that were going insane or something like that. I don't know. It's pretty cool. Anyways, here's this week's anime DVD collection update. Pretty much the only thing I watched was the second half of Dr. Stone Season 1. You know, Season 1 Part 2, which came out last week. And, you know, it was entertaining. It was, well, it's very similar to the first season in that, you know, or the first half of the first season, that there's things out there which you look at it and you go, oh my god, that is definitely wrong. But it's not the sort of wrong that brings away from what's going on per se. I think the biggest example is they talk about the idea, I think first they label it the idea of making a smartphone, then they say it's actually a cell phone, but from what I can tell, it's not even a cell phone, it's a radio. I mean, my understanding is that cell phones come from the idea of cellular networks, and the idea is while there's wireless communication, it's between your phone and a tower, which would be done through radio waves of some sort. And the tower would then pretty much send it through the cell network, which I'm not even sure if I'm really using the word there correctly. But the idea is that, you know, your phone communicates wirelessly with the local radio tower, which then sends it to another radio tower to the closer to the destination, and sends it out to that other phone. And it's the idea that these networks know where to send that information. That's the thing that makes it cellular, not the wireless part. And this one is more just wireless communication, but it keeps calling it a cell phone. And this is definitely not a translation thing, because they're showing a little phone. Like, I think maybe they first showed a smartphone, but then they maybe showed a dumber old cell phone. But they're calling it that, and it makes sense to call that from a dub perspective, because that's probably what it was called in the Japanese version. And it's wrong, but it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, well, that's a wrong that just makes me unable to watch this. It's just one of those ones where you're just like, oh well, at least we're seeing them build the first radio. And there's some of that that's interesting, because I don't see them talk about anything that would necessarily say what frequency they're broadcasting and receiving on, which is a radio thing, but it's its own thing. And maybe it's not exactly radio. It's possible. There could be a different concept of the wireless technology, which makes it where it can listen and receive on longer distances without being just radio or something like that, because they don't have a mile-long antenna or anything like that. But then again, ham radio operators don't really have mile-long antennas. They do have pretty big radio towers, but those are also for communicating pretty much across the world. And while some of what I forgot his name talks about maybe suggested powers along those lines, none of their goals are actually specifically that, and it would just be a stepping stone. But otherwise, there's other little things like, I thought he was supposed to make an ice cold cola, and for some reason it looked like it was ice cold, but they never really established how he was generating cooling technology, which there's a lot of understanding and ideas, but it's kind of it felt like something was missing there. But nothing that's just fine, whatever, because it gave other interesting pieces of information, other things that we could play with that are not dangerous, like most of the things they're actually doing in here. They also flew through the chemistry really, really fast, and I don't think knowing chemistry would have specifically helped me, just because they're intentionally skipping steps. They're not trying to teach you chemistry. They're trying to say, these are the building blocks, and we build up to this, this, and this, and this. And, if you don't understand the chemical reactions along the way, that's perfectly fine. It's entertaining because you're kind of seeing it, and you kind of understand that even though there's this environment where the antagonist is proving himself even stupider, where he's slightly changing the way he's stating his philosophy, but at the same time, the people he's resurrecting are nothing more than thugs who, if they were to get a power advantage, then all of a sudden, oh wait, no, things would be 100 times worse than what he purported we had before. And it's just the antagonist is dumber than dirt, and worse than a hypocrite. He talks oh, I'm getting blood in my hands, nobody else has to. I'm like, no, what you're doing is you're setting things up to be bad, and you're not really going to prevent the thing that you think you're preventing, because well, I mean, that's kind of the problem with the show in terms of it talking about science. It doesn't portray itself as being a long-term thing per se. Mostly what I mean is, science is the idea of building and testing models to explain the world. And like I said, this is more of a show about engineering than about science, because it's really about trying to build stuff using the application of that knowledge, which is really good, and maybe it could still be called science. I don't know. But the real problem is you need to be able to pass this information on to people, because our main character is not going to live a billion years. He's not even trying to say, oh, let's get ourselves to a super science future. He's just well, I'm a big fan of science, so let's get everybody back up to speed on stuff. But the important thing that's generally missing there is he's not really passing on methodology per se. He's not passing on these models. He's not testing these models. He's not building these models. For the most part, there's some parts of it which are some of that sort of stuff. Again, because the entire
people petrification and how to unpetrify them, that's a really good example of science in this, because he's not explaining why it happened, but he is building a model that gives him the ability to say, okay, this breaks people out, even though he doesn't understand everything. And that's what science really is. It's about building these models that are useful for making predictions. And yeah, so that's why it's really weird, but you know, I say all of that, but it's still kind of fun because you're watching this low-tech to high-tech upgrade sort of thing going on, and it's not even one of those things where it's just like, you know, modern man walking up to a primal tribe and saying, oh, here's a cell phone, and, you know, 2 decades later, you know, they've got computers and stuff like that. No, this is, you know, kind of building stuff up, and you get some more insight into what happened in the world, and it's neat. It almost feels like it's a little distracting, but it works out pretty okay. You know, again, it's fun. The only... Okay, I keep saying the only, like, there's only one complaint. And I've, you know, gone back and forth with complaints, but that's because the show gives you a lot to really talk about, and it's entertaining while doing it. So, for the most part, that means it's a good thing, right? And the weird part is that it felt like if this was a season 1, then it should have ended with something a little more, with more oomph to it, I guess. Trying to think if I'm describing that correctly, because basically it kind of starts seeming like it's setting itself up to an important event, but it stops before that. But I forgot what it did in the very last episode, which did feel like it kind of acknowledged that it was reaching the end of an episode. Oh well. What else is there to mention? So, Phasmophobia had an update where there's a new prison map, and it's actually pretty fun. I thought it was going to be large, like the asylum, and it would just be something that you spend a lot of time trawling through just to even find out where the ghost is. But it actually says it's moderate sized, and you know, I didn't even look at that part until I had played it a couple times, but playing it doesn't feel that big. You know, it doesn't feel small. It's not small, no. But it's definitely not asylum big. It's got this interesting kind of layout near the entrance, which is where the ghosts, I think, tend to be. But it's also got prison cell blocks. And I would be really worried about finding a ghost in the cafeteria, because that's neat. Neatly huge. It's a neat map. And I guess it's unfortunate that I don't record myself playing 24/7. I only really capture stuff that happens while I'm on Twitch, so hopefully something funny like that will happen there too. But, you know, one of the times, you know, I actually got caught by a ghost once, and for anybody that plays the game, no surprise, it was a Revenant. So, the thing that was really funny about it was a baby ghost in the prison map for some reason. And, you know, because they crawl on the ground and because it's a Revenant, it was basically a baby with a rocket up its ass. That just kind of zoomed up to me and just yeeted me. And then did it again for somebody else. I'm like, yeah, the rest of y'all should get out of there. This is definitely Revenant. We haven't collected any evidence, but it's definitely a Revenant. Revenants. So basically, there's 2 ghosts that are fast. The Revenant is one, and the Djinn is the other. But the Djinn is only fast in the light. You know, that's one of those interesting things the game gives, because being in the light prevents your sanity from being drained from being in the dark, I guess. So darkness is a constant sanity drain. So in theory, it's good to have lights on, but when you're dealing with a Djinn, then it'll just chase you down and murderize you if you're doing that. And I mean, sometimes you have to be kind of careful with lights being on. If you start seeing evidence that it might be a Djinn, then you probably have to be careful. But then I think there's a little bit of overlap between the Djinn and the Mare. Think of Mare like Nightmare, because the Mare attacks if people are in the dark. So if you don't want the Mare to be given chances to attack as often, then you know, you kind of don't want it to be dark, and so you can be in situations where you're having to decide when to have light and when to have darkness. And yeah, it was really confusing because this revenant was coming from somewhere inside of a prison cell block. We never did isolate where, but they kind of like to hang around somewhere else. And I think that's an interesting gimmick of the map, where if a ghost happens to spawn in a cell, well, there's not much space in there for them, so they tend to wander out of there and create evidence elsewhere. No, fun stuff. Other than that, I'm trying to think what else is worth talking about. I mean, I know I've been doing some Unity stuff because, you know, I'm finally getting up to speed on what I wanted to do with my world map. But I'm running into a problem where Udon is misbehaving. And if you don't know what Udon is, it's basically I guess a programming language made by the VR chat people. I think it's made by them, with the goal of having things be more visual oriented, but you can go alternative routes for it. But the main editor they had in mind, the reason it's called Udon is because udon is a kind of Japanese noodle. Maybe it's not Japanese. It's Japanese at least eat udon noodles. And that's the idea, is you have these graphs and you have lines going between them, and the lines maybe kind of look like noodles. Maybe it means it's spaghetti code. But it's annoying because, you know, there's some problems where I've mentioned before that the editor lets you do, but the way it compiles it into assembly code causes variable scope issues, where it doesn't think certain variables are in scope for certain situations, and it had already cleared them out of the stack. And if that goes over your head, don't worry about it. It just means that I look for value, but I don't find value, or I find something else that's a completely different kind of value altogether. And I've come up with rules to kind of avoid that sort of stuff, and I've been encountering a couple of those in situations because I'm adding new configurable options to my world. But the important thing is, you know, all that means nothing, because right now I'm dealing with a problem where one instance of one of my udon things is getting a null pointer exception, and the only explanation for that, given that it works in the Unity editor itself and there's some other multiple copies of it in there that all work on their own, pretty much just means it's running the code before it's loaded all of the objects into the world. Maybe this is something that's been fixed in a newer version of Udon. I might have to try and update my SDK, but it sounds like that's not an easy thing, so I'm trying to figure other stuff out. But it's really annoying when this basically is the code admitting, yeah, there's nothing wrong with your code, it's just something wrong with, you know, Udon. That's annoying. But I don't know. Outside of that, let's see. Steven Universe, you know, once again, looking at it, I couldn't help but feel like, you know, it's unfortunate because they almost had a really spectacular ending, but then they just made it an okay one. And the reason I feel that mostly comes down to their setup is so spectacular, but their resolution was a little rushed, a little too quick. I know there's some people that have said, oh, what, did you expect them to use fusion? Did you expect them to use more combats? And the answer is yes. I mean, the combat one is one where you could play around with just a little bit, but you didn't need too much. But fusion, yes, because they kind of established this last problem as being an emotional one, and it's important because fusion within Steven Universe is established as not necessarily being two beings becoming one. This is especially, was it a season 2 episode? Where Garnet describes a certain kind of fusion as the most beautiful fusion yet. And, you know, that's kind of been the point. A lot of these very gemmy things have actually been, you know, ways of representing other ideas, and that's why it kind of feels cheap, because they came up with this gem idea to represent this big, huge problem for our main character, but then instead of kind of using some of the tools the series had designed along the way to approach these topics, it didn't use them. And maybe you could say, oh, that's not too big of a deal, but the problem is that they had actually did a pretty good job of setting the stakes pretty high. They had a couple of characters that said, oh, this is a problem. We might not be able to solve this. And they really needed a solution that reinforced that. And, outside of that, the series ends with these problems aren't ever really fixed. People always have to work on them. And that's, I think, correct. That's a good message for the series to walk away with. It's just that transition from final problem to resolution is, again, it felt a little rushed, a little quick, a little not as thought out as it could have been. And it's unfortunate, but I still think it's a pretty neat series. If you're watching it and you've never watched it for the first time, you definitely have to give the first season a little breathing room, because there's definitely my feeling has always been that the first season mostly feels like the show had a very general idea of what it wanted to be, but nothing specifically. So that's why you have all these random episodic things that come out that are neat stuff, but maybe don't feel like there's a lot of meat. And it felt, for me, it kind of felt that way until I think closer to the end of the first season, where it's I'm like, yeah, I think I know what I want to be as a series. And it doesn't always focus on that, but after that it feels a lot neater. It feels like it has more direction and idea of what it wants to be. And it may sound like a lot because the first season has a lot of episodes, but you have to remember those episodes are half-length episodes, so they're pretty quick. It basically means that I think season 1, while it is maybe longer than the other seasons, it's also quicker to digest stuff. It could be something that you just have on in the background and you're like, oh, the Beat Meat Mania episode is actually pretty fun. That's one of my favorites. Or early season favorites, at least. Too Many Birthdays may be one as well. I think that's what it's called, but I would have to play the episode to tell. But that's early stuff where it's just like neat. I found them to be neat. So make of that what you will. I guess that probably exhausts everything I can think of planning to talk about. So, yeah. It's not Christmas yet. I get one more anime DVD collection update before Christmas. I'm not expecting to give y'all any big updates for Christmas. I'm not even sure when stuff is going to arrive, because at this moment, even though I think everything is in transit via the postal service, and I've told them to text me whenever any updates to tracking happens, I think a lot of stuff isn't happening, and it's probably because the big old crazy Christmas shopping stuff is going on, which is unfortunate because I kind of hope one package arrives by next week, because that one would be one from Right Stuff, which not only has the next part of Demon Slayer, but there are like 2 or 3 other things in there, which means that it's not going to go in the mailbox. They're going to put that in the parcel locker because it's going to be too big for a mailbox. But as far as the tracking says, it's only been accepted. So unless their system is completely crashed, their stuff is still moving, despite the fact that they're not giving me updates. Well, yeah, I don't know. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see. I can't really think of anything else to talk about other than saying, yeah, Violet Evergarden is probably the next target for me to watch. Now I have the TV series, and I'll watch the movie after the TV series, assuming I do that. I think everything's okay schedule-wise. I think people have gotten that prison map out of their blood, except for maybe my brother who I stream with tonight. We'll have to see. But, yeah. We'll just have to see. Y'all, have a nice week.